We are going to have today's seminar, not like the traditional, with the traditional method. We are going to have like more informal session today. I formally welcome Professor Dr. Anita Weiss. She is Professor of Political Sociology, International Studies, Religious Studies with focus on Asia. She is Professor of Political Sociology in Oregon University, United States. She has almost 40 years of research experience in on Pakistani society. She has recently written this book, which is in front of you, Counter-Violent Extremism, which we will be talking today, or she would be just giving a brief of that, and then we will have other panelists to shed light on that. We have Dr. Shabana, who is head of the DSS here in Quaid-e-Azam. We have Dr. Rabia. She is a sociologist, a senior sociologist. She has a PhD from Australia and postdoc under the Fulbright from US, and she has gone through the book thoroughly. She would highlight some of the aspects. We have Dr. Farhan Hanif. He is director SPIR Quaid-e-Azam University. He's also gone through the book and he will have his own perspective. And besides that, we will keep it open to everyone, that anyone who has a political perspective or sociological perspective or anthropological perspective, he or she can raise question in the middle. It would not be like a banking model of education lecture that she would be talking for like 1.5 hours and then you will have 1, 2, 3 questions. She would have a keynote for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we would request the panelists to highlight some of the aspect of that. And if you have any question in the middle that you want to put to Professor Anita related to the book, or you want to put that question to any relevant panelist, that would be easy on the spot, because we will not have a separate session for question answers. I also welcome all my colleagues from Quaid-e-Azam University, Department of Sociology, Dr. Sarfaraz, Dr. Naima from ORIC, other graduates from sociology, anthropology, and all other disciplines here in Quaid-e-Azam University, and I see some students from other universities as well. So with this, I would request Professor Anita. Let me mention it that she was not having good throat, so she would not be that much loud that you expect from a professor, but she would be able to communicate her message thoroughly. The issue that she's going to talk is very complex. It's a very complex issue, and it's very subjective and need to be contextually understood. If somebody just try to goes into the origin of different factors or causes of counter-violence extremism, it would be difficult to find out exactly what are the factors that are responsible for a particular act. And this is what David has said and Anita has quoted, accidental guerrilla. You can see small accidents in different places. So we sociologists dominantly focus on the pull factors and the push factors, that what are the push and pull factors that lead to the violent behavior, but sometimes those are really challenged by other events across the world. Like dominantly when we talk to students, they say poverty, illiteracy, undemocratic society, these are responsible for violent extremism. But on the other hand, we see some cases in very developed societies, democratic societies, with people having high education from good universities, liberal universities, and they also commit such kind of acts, whether it's against a particular religious community or ethnic community. So you can see the variety of that. She would be highlighting all those contextual accidental guerrilla events.
The issue we're talking about is one that really is not looked at very much in Pakistan. In Pakistan, too, I think far too many people think about CVE, or countering violent extremism, in the idea of what can the military do, what can outside forces do, what are outside forces doing, v'geta. I'm looking at, in this book, the everyday actions of people all over Pakistan who are just fed up, who are saying, bus, we've had it. We've had it with the violence, we've had it with the fear. We want, and they're standing up to assert, this is who we are. We are not that. We are not those extremists. We are not those terrorists. And this is what they're doing, whether they're doing it in art, through poetry, through organizing in small groups, in theater, in performance. And that's what the various chapters of my book are about. So, I told you all I'd be much better once I start talking about my book. I was worried I didn't have much energy, lekin metiku. This, I should say, I should add a little bit to the introduction. This is my 8th book about Pakistan, and it's my last one. I know I said that about my last book, but this is it. I mean, Budi Ogai, and it's also, I'm working with somebody, actually I am working on a book project, but it's somebody else's project on lesser known shrines of the walled city of Lahore. But anyhow, so the book is organized in such a way, the first chapter is an introduction, backdrop to extremism and state actor responses, and then I look at poetry as resistance to violence and extremism, and I'm especially looking at the kinds of resistance poetry we mostly find here. That's Pashto and Sindhi resistance poetry. Then I look at music and performance. Music is a medium for countering violent extremism, and theater and performance, using art to reclaim identity and meaning. I'll talk about these in a bit. Religion itself counters extremism. What are religious leaders doing themselves to organize, to mobilize, to say, that's it? Islam is not an extremist religion. We're not all out to destroy others, or even within to destroy. So I was very impressed by what the Lahore group has done, that was organized by Imam Abdul Khabir Azad, who is the Imam of the Badshai Mosque, who sought out other religious leaders, all of whom I think I met. Maulana Zubair Ahmed Zahir, who's head of the LA Hadith at Firdaus Market in Lahore, and Imam Naqvi, head of the Shias in Lahore, Raqib Naimi, who is a Barelvi in Gari Shahu in Lahore, and many others. And I also have gone to International Islamic University and met extensively with Professor Dr. Ziaul Haq and his efforts. I've met with Qibla Ayaz. I have a wonderful photo in the book. The Oxford University Press didn't want too many pictures. I would have loved to have even more photos. But I have a great photo in the book of Dr. Qibla Ayaz, chairperson of the Council of Islamic Ideology, who had invited many religious leaders from different religions and sects, and invited me, and we all stood inside the Council of Islamic Ideology a few years ago as we cut the Christmas cake together. And people felt that this was a momentous occasion because they never had a Christmas cake cutting ceremony before inside the council offices. So anyhow, then chapter 6 is on innovative educational efforts, where I look at the backdrop to challenges for education in Pakistan, and how the Bacha Khan Education Foundation in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and the Zoya Science Schools in southern Punjab, both of which are English medium schools, teach to a very high standard, teach science, teach about technology, v'ghaira, but they also teach peace. And they have a zero tolerance policy. And my findings from talking with especially older students at both kinds of school systems about the sense of social responsibility that students who have gone through those school systems tend to get, as opposed to what they tend to get elsewhere. And finally, communal and social actions, groups standing together, small groups, individual groups, and then some controversial groups that we'll talk about at the very end so that I don't get kicked out. But anyhow, something that I see as the equivalent of Black Lives Matter in Pakistan. But I'd like to start out by reading you a little bit from my preface, and then I'll read a little bit from the book itself. Because, like I said, you don't know me. I've been coming to Pakistan over 40 years. This is my 8th book. And I really have dedicated my life to trying to understand social issues in Pakistan. और मैंने उनको suggest किया. I said, for this talk, why don't you invite faculty from different departments who, I mean, we have a political scientist, sociologist, and others, and they can ask me questions, and hopefully students will realize that social scientists, while we're grappling with similar issues, we use different lenses to look at those issues. So I hope that that becomes very insightful later. I'm not sure, because I don't know any of you, so. Okay, the first paragraph is personal, but let's get to know each other, right? So my life, and if you don't understand something I say, please raise your hand and I'll tarjuman kuru. Because I tried to use, you know, in the preface, you use a little flowery language, more than normal. My life has been entwined with South Asia as far back as I can recall. When I was 10, I had pictures of India hanging all over my room, but little did I realize then that they were stylized representations of Western images of the subcontinent. My first sojourn outside of the United States was to India my sophomore year in college, and I have sought to return to South Asia annually ever since. Yet that India of my youth was not the nation-state of India, but the larger culture area that comprises much of South Asia, including Pakistan. There is no place in the world that captures home to me more than Pakistan. Thinking of Pakistan evokes that warmth and love for place, people, and setting that can only be found at home. I was fortunate, I'm not reading the whole thing, just segments, but I was fortunate to travel to Pakistan a year before Zia-ul-Haq, and I'm talking about the Chief Martial Law Administrator, Zia-ul-Haq, before he proclaimed his Islamization program in February 1979. So yeah, we're talking about the Dark Ages. I came 1st January 1978. Sabse pehle baad mein Pakistan aayi thi. I saw Lahore as a city of gardens, a place where life is lived on the streets, and in my naivety ka matlab, in my simplicity, I saw Lahore as a place where everyone was welcome. But within a year, between the promulgation of the Hudud ordinances, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan that unleashed havoc upon Pakistan, and Zia-ul-Haq pushing his Wahhabi agenda, the social cohesion and celebrations I had witnessed in Pakistan, albeit limited, were becoming unhinged. I could still visit a village and swim in a tube well, take a hike along a mountain trail, and get henna applied to my hands on Eid. But along the way, I saw changes happening in my home, which I cannot walk away from. Was the advancing anger and despair giving way to violence? Or were there other forces feeding that violence? And I know that this question remains unanswerable at this time. But more important is what I see occurring now, which is my inspiration for writing this book. I see something exciting happening all around the country. People asserting they want their cultural identity back, their society intact, and throw off the bondages of hatred, violence, and fear that at least for a while seemed to break out at any time in Pakistan. In effect, they are cleaning their house and my house, and I am documenting the exciting ways and the exciting acts in which they are engaged. After I completed my doctoral dissertation, long before most of you were born, I contacted a friend, a social activist in Lahore, and said, you know, what can I give back to Pakistan now? This was in the mid-1980s. I finished my dissertation writing about Lahore, industrial development, social change, and what she said actually is important to me to this day. She advised me to strive to give a voice to people who are not readily listened to, and this led me to research working women's lives in the walled city of Lahore. I feel that I've been engaged in this ever since then, struggling to understand what is happening in Pakistan and giving voice to it. But of all the research and writing that I've ever done, nothing is more important to me than giving voice to the amazing people who are recapturing their identity, Pakistan's identity, and asserting that this is who we truly are. The APS attack happened. It had a powerful impact on many people. And I was here. I remember hearing Nawaz Sharif in his usually somber, with his somber face going, "Afsos hai." And I said, that's not enough. It was not enough for the Prime Minister of my adopted country to say, too bad about what happened. It had to be called out for being horrific, monstrous, and that everything about it was against Pakistan. But in my horror, I also realized that this was not an act of the Pakistan I knew. The Pakistanis were also mortified and were standing up all over the country for what was right, just, and authentic. Hence the idea to write this book was born. I spoke with friends and colleagues who directed me to others, and my eyes were open to what could be deemed acts of subversion occurring throughout the country, but what are in actuality acts of reclaiming identity and authenticity. This is nationalism in its truest form. I needed to do this research for my own soul, to see what Pakistanis have been doing to right the wrongs that have plagued our home these past 30-odd years. My greatest wish is that I do justice to their efforts. Can you hear me like this?
Yes.
It's really hard to read from a book with one hand. So, anyhow, I know we have a lot of questions coming. Yeah, this might help a little. I want to turn to the questions, but I just wanted to give you a little taste of what's in here. And I thought, normally when I read little excerpts, I just turned to the introduction. I can't help but read the quote that starts the book, because this is a quote that's always been important to me, and I think should be important to everybody around the world, and especially Pakistan. And it's by Albert Einstein, one of my personal heroes. He wrote, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." So as a sociologist, this is my effort to do something, right? To show this is what Pakistan really is. Pakistan is not those news headlines of crazy people going off and attacking things. This is the real Pakistan. This is the Pakistanis who are standing up and saying, and not going along with that dance of violence and extremism. But so my argument in the book is that what is occurring today is a concerted effort by Pakistanis themselves to bring people together at the public level to reject extremism, to recapture their cultural values and identity, and to celebrate their society. The reality is that a great number of individuals and groups in Pakistan, as we see in the book, are engaged in doing just that. Now, I'm not saying this is what Pakistanis should be doing, but rather I spent about nearly 4 years. I had a very prestigious Guggenheim Research Award. Yay, that was great. That helped me to be able to afford to do much of this. And what was supposed to last 1 year, I made sure lasted 2 years. But I went to places in Pakistan I'd never been before. I went to Dargai in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. I went outside of Khairpur in Upper Sindh. I went all over southern Punjab. I went I think the thing that was momentous for me is when I went to Sindh. Is there anybody from Sindh here? I know you don't have too many Sindhis here. Well, then you'll understand this. I felt that when I got to Sindh, all of a sudden my eyes were open. It's like, I thought I knew Pakistan. Where has this amazing, multicultural, multi-ethnic place been? I write about this in the book that when I was in Khairpur, first they took me, I went to the shrine of Sechel Sarmast, who I had not known about before. And I include some of the poetry of Sechel Sarmast in the book as well. And where he's talking about, I'm not a Sunni, I'm not a Shia, I'm a Muslim. And he disdains the categories people are forced to be put into. And he disdains he disdains when people are not honest and forthright, I think. That's a good way to put it. But then after that, the people from the university who took me there took me to a small town called Ranipur. And in Ranipur, they made a big deal about telling me that there's this one wall. On one side of the wall was a majlis, and on the other side of the wall was a Hindu temple. But the mosque has recently been transformed into a Deobandi madrasa. So this is all you have to tell a sociologist, right? Like, okay, everybody talks about, interfaith harmony and cross-cultural harmony in Sindh. You tell me, on one side of the wall is a Deobandi madrasa, and the other side of the wall is a Hindu temple. So the intrepid sociologist is like, okay, I'm going to get the dirt on this one. So I go there, drive up, things are, I can see the madrasa, I see the Hindu temple, go into the temple, talk to the Panditji. How has your life changed since they put in the madrasa and it's no longer just a mosque? And I was waiting for him to tell me how they were harassing, but he went, if anything, it's changed so much better. Because the students at the madrasa, anytime we need help, they come to give us assistance. They celebrate our holidays with us. They invite us to celebrate their holidays with them. So, of course, I had to ask again, they don't bother you at all? He said, no, we're all Sindhis here. And I was like, that's it. They're all Sindhis there. And to them, the fact that they believed in different religions should not be enough that it would separate them from each other. Yes, you're going to hear stories about madrasas in Tarparkar, hurting local sensitivities and all. But that's not what I saw that day in Ranipur. One moment. But I also want to talk a little bit about some of the...
Do you need tea here?
No, I just had the water. Some of the Pashto resistance poetry. I have a lot of incredible poetry. I often read the poetry of, unfortunately now, the late Roghani Sab, the poetry of Taliman Khan. But today is Dr. Sadia here from anthropology?
She will join us.
But she's not here now. I think he finished, I'm not positive, but there's a doctoral student in anthropology from Quaid-e-Azam University, and his name is Khan Zaman Kakar. And unfortunately, he's in Killa Sefula right now, but he was very excited when he said, I understand you're going to be reading my poetry. And I said, okay, I'll read his poem because his poetry is amazing. What I wrote about him, and he's like one of you. Remember, he was a doctoral student at Quaid-e-Azam University. I'm not sure if he finished yet or not. But what I write is he's a Pashto poet from Baluchistan working towards his degree. He contends that Pashto poetry is primarily resistance poetry, fighting and countering the invaders in one way or another, as the history of the region is the history of resistance. He belongs to a progressive literary circle where they believe that literature should take a side. Literature cannot be neutral and should resist oppression, terrorism, and war and reclaim the land which is their own. He said he says it doesn't belong to the terrorists, and they must side with people who are fighting against the terrorists. He had never seen an influential poet who appreciates war, terrorism, or mujahids. And so Pashto poets have to challenge stereotypes. Pashto poets have to challenge stereotypes that Pakhtuns are savage tribal people, and he writes, this is his first poem, "Every house has the Diwan of Rahman Baba, but still the homeland is being burned in the fire of war. Ideas of destruction are not current only in the minds of the congregation of mosques. We can see a mullah and a devil in every person. The rope that strangled our Najib's neck yesterday," and you know Najib, the man whose murder in Karachi really ignited the fire that led to the Pakhtun Tahaffuz movement. "The rope that strangled our Najib's neck yesterday, today that same rope wraps itself around his killer. Those who had the hand of Bacha Khan placed on their heads, they don't need the gold medals of the state." So in his poetry, Khan Zaman Kakar seeks to speak truth to power, declaring that not only have Pakhtun lands been devastated, but the privacy of their lives has also been taken away from them, as seen in this following couplet from a much longer ghazal, but I had kept it very short. "I am sending you the picture of the demolished bazaar of Miramshah. I'm telling you nothing more about the decline of our honor. I want to block the ways of mullahs' thoughts in our homelands. That's why I'm writing poems in praise of girls' beauty. A nationalist is one who wants his or her homeland's freedom. A nationalist is not someone who just carries a red flag. If you're writing our private stories in Punjab's newspapers, would you think I would not call you a traitor?" Finally, there's one other poem I'd like to read from this tradition, but it's actually in the music section, the music section of the book. The music section has music, and then it has performance, and this is something that was written by, sorry, those are my place markers, I don't need them. And here it is. How many of you speak Pashto? Oh, good. Well, sorry, this is in English, but I got it translated. And you can go back to the original Pashto also. There is a Pashto poet that so many of you raised your hands. I'm sure you know who he is. His name is Karan Khan. And right now, I'm very proud to say Dr. Karan Khan. He just finished his doctorate. He is an amazing person. And if you haven't listened to his poetry, I mean his music, please do. But his music really speaks poetry. So Karan Khan, a few years ago, February 2000, well, it was the 2018 Pakistan Super League, he was invited to write the anthem for Peshawar Zalmi, the Peshawar cricket team. I feel that the song he wrote for Peshawar Zalmi is inspirational. It's not particularly for the team, but for all Pakistani youth, the Zalmi in Pashto. He did this work with no compensation as a message for the Pakhtun youth. And his message is that they've all endured the unrelenting abusive stereotype of being terrorists and extremists, and the song is a powerful inspiration for them to get to the field and show the world the character of Pakhtun youth. I'll read one verse and then we'll open it up. Does that make sense? He writes, would you like to hear it? Yes. Okay, good. I thought you would. So this is the Peshawar Zalmi anthem. And what I find amazing about it, it never mentions cricket. It never mentions playing competitively. We are moving ahead, but this is how you do it. This is how you counter it. This is how you empower people. You give them a sense of importance. We are moving ahead and getting education and ripening our skills. We share a common vision and a clear goal. Whether we are from the upper or from the lower region, we are thankful to God that people appreciate Peshawar youth, Peshawar Zalmi, from the upper and from the lower. We celebrate our victories together and we share our defeats. Our girls and young... Little vakva. We celebrate our victories together and we share our defeats. Our girls and young boys, we have common victories and common losses. Every Pakhtun who is outside of his home and land, stand firm beside us. Let the world know who we are. Let the Peshawar youth prove to the world that the Peshawar Zalmi have the same character as the youth of Peshawar. Our youth are... I have to keep reading. This is so good. Our youth are energized and the world will witness our spirit, that we don't care about victory or loss. We want to show the world that we're getting to the field. We don't care about winning or losing. We just have to come out to the field and play the game. That we are scattered everywhere, that's the pain we carry with us. The youth is my army, whether they're from the upper or from the lower region. Peshawar youth seek peace and development, learning skills and getting educated. This is your team, O Peshawar youth. Each one of you are heroes. When you are together, then every day is a festive day, whether you are from the upper or from the lower. Don't hesitate, but instead get inspiration from our shared success. Peshawar youth, Peshawar Zalmi. I read these poems as examples of just small things that individuals have done, writing songs, writing poetry, to take a stand and saying, this is who we are. And throughout the book, you'll find examples of people using artwork, like the Rang de Karachi people. They were students at the Indus school. Munawar Ali Syed told me that they used to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning with whitewash. They'd go out to the streets of Karachi, and using whitewash, they would paint over hate language and quickly put up stencils to cover promoting peace. And I do have photographs of some of those stencils in the book. And then that gradually morphed into the walls of Karachi and other things. But similar kinds of actions, whether we're talking about the Lahore Biennale, which I drove all over Lahore with Qudsiya Rahim, who founded the Lahore Biennale, looking at the bus stops that they had gotten different Lahore artists to create. Why was I looking at the bus stops? Because they were beautiful works of art that some worker would be sitting there with his head covered in the heat of the summer, or the head covered with the rain of the winter, and saying, somebody likes me, somebody's thinking about me, I matter in this society. Is that a way to counter extremism? I think absolutely. So I have some pictures of those bus stops that the Lahore Biennale had sponsored in the book as well. There's a lot more I could talk about, but I think that it would be nicer at this time to open it up for questions. I hope that I gave you a small taste of what's in here. But please realize, I know you're looking at my face and you're saying, foreigner, hai. Remember, I've been coming to Pakistan since before you were born. Itna foreigner nahi hu. है ना पंजाबी तो गल भी आंदी है पश्तो तो बहुत मुश्किल ज़बान है पश्तो तो नहीं आती लेकिन ना सोच लो कि I'm trying to impose something on Pakistan and Pakistanis. All I'm doing is I'm documenting the exciting things in which people are engaged. And this is only a small group of what I learned. And I would like to encourage all of you who are social scientists, especially those of you who are sociologists, go out and find your own narrative about what is really happening in Pakistan. Because I'm tired of people who don't know what's happening capturing the narrative. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Anita. That was a very elaborate lecture. I would say that was not a keynote, but a lecture, a long lecture. You highlighted all the major chapters of your book, and this is how the title is saying that what are extremist or violent act, and what are the local responses, how people in their different localities and communities are responding back to violent activities or violent acts. Now we will move on to Dr. Rabia, a senior sociologist with a focus on gender and women in Pakistan. Having gone through the book, she would highlight some of the aspects that she thinks is important, and then we will move on to the rest of panelists. Dr. Rabia.
So, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to speak on this important, very interesting book by Professor Anita Weiss on countering extremism in Pakistan, local actions, local voices. I read this book over previous summer, when I was visiting my hometown, Chitral, away from the reach of emails and WhatsApp messages. So I, thoroughly enjoyed it, when I was sitting between the mountains, greenery and close to nature. So it gave me really this ability to do things which we always think about, but we don't really have, the time to really conceptualize those issues and, think about them, in our own capacity, just normal, ordinary citizens. So thank you so much. Read this book for several reasons. First of all, reading Professor Weiss for several years as a graduate student at the University of New South Wales. So I was in love with her work and I had to read the book. But secondly, I think as Pakistanis, each of us have experienced terrorism, acts of terrorism in one way or the other, So I guess deep inside we are interested to know, like she often says, I've heard her saying, the Pakistani we want to move ahead with it and we want to have an alternative narrative, So and then of course I had the opportunity to listen to her talk at the IRU in 2019, and when she shared some of the findings of the book. Really looking forward to that. When it's published, I will read it. So coming to the book itself, I've just set some notes for myself just in case I don't miss out the important aspects. But to start with, like I said, that terrorism is an experience which we have gone through, and I think one of the point of departure for this book itself, which Professor Anita Weiss mentions in the preface as well as in many of her talks, is the APS event. When she talks about how, she got this idea that though she had decided previously that she's never going to write a book, but then she decided that she's going to write another book, and it's got to be on this very topic. So and I think I have similar experiences because I still recall, the APS event, and of course so many other events which we experienced as individuals, as citizens of Pakistan, bomb blasts over mosques and public spaces, and of course the APS. When I went to work the next day after the APS event, I still recall one of my colleagues was in tears. And she was like, I don't feel like, hugging my children and kissing them when so many mothers have lost, their kids. So I think that really shows, the extent of, the pain which we were feeling as mothers, as ordinary human beings, what had happened, and we were really just, like Professor Anita says, we were saying it's buzz, it's over, we don't want to live with it anymore. So and so coming back to the book, I think it's very important and it's very timely in many ways. Because first, to me as sociologist, instead of focusing on the common way of looking at terrorism, at the state actors which are responsible for terrorist acts or countering terrorism, what this book does is that it is taking an alternative approach, and it is focusing on known state actors such as poems and Sufis and educationists and religious organizations, religious leadership, and what they are doing in their own capacities to counter terrorism. So that is something very unique and something which makes this book very important to us, not only as sociologists but as students of social sciences, as well as as Pakistanis, because just like she says quite often that this book is for you, for the Pakistanis, because it's giving us a voice. Even though I had not written about it, being a sociologist, my other colleagues had not written about it, but she wrote about it, the things which we were feeling. So yeah, I agree that it gives a voice to us, and it's really, telling the world out there, within Pakistan as well as outside Pakistan, that what we are really feeling, and what alternative narratives do we want really, what kind of changes do you want, and how we want to, really experience our country, our culture differently. So I think that's something which is very powerful, which comes from this book. So it's a very detailed ethnography, and like she mentions, I think I was listening to one of her talk where she says I had a car and I was able to drive through in the entire Pakistan. So she literally drove to each and every provinces, and she was able to find out about interesting issues, and on the basis of those she identifies different themes which she just gave a little glimpse of to you in the beginning, and most of these, and honestly at the end of reading the book, the stuff on poetry and education and on religion, I couldn't really decide that which of these I really really think are very powerful, and I want to really focus more on, because I did honestly, one reason for reading this book was also to kind of give myself a direction of what kind of researches could we possibly do in this particular area, and what are the gaps which she has identified. So I couldn't really decide that which one should I go for, because each chapter, each theme is very unique, and it has its own meanings. And really, I think for graduate students, there is so much out there which they can take as a point of departure, and they can start working on them. Let's say if you take on the poetry itself, I mean, it's beautiful, what she has written is so powerful, the way she depicts that, how these artists, how these poems tell us about what people are saying, and how they are showing their ways of resisting and the terrorism which we are feeling in one way or the other deep inside us. So I think what was very inspiring for me, though there were many things, but what I would put at number one was really the account of the Pashto and Sindhi poetry she gives throughout the book, and focusing on things like poetry and mushairas. She highlights how the Taliban narrative of Islam is being resisted by the people locally, and she also uses the poetry of Rahman Baba and academic scholars and A&T workers to show the message of peace which is advocated by the community. Again, things which we have forgotten, which we always had with us, the poetry of Rahman Baba, but we have forgotten about it, and so she is actually telling us to go back to those, that treasure which we have, and to actually pick it up and start as a point of departure of how we could possibly use it as a way of resisting. And again, she also focuses on Sufi traditions of Sajjad Sarmast and Shah Abdul Latif Bithai, which are cited as acts of diversity. So these are very important for sociologists, that what are the points, what are the themes which are showing us how and in what way can we promote peace, but also what are the acts of diversity, how we can go about that. So these were the points which I took away from some of her chapters. And then of course she's also focusing on individual performers, and I really enjoyed reading about Saif Sammejo. Yeah, it was really interesting, and Temur Rahman and Gulab Khair Afridi and Karan Khan, which you just read for us. So these actually give us a very detailed activities of how these performing groups as well as individuals are doing in their own capacity to counter the extremism which we are experiencing in one way or the other. And then the chapter on religion itself was very important. Also, by reading the poetry stuff, I really felt in a state of harmony. I felt that I was at peace as well. So that's why I would recommend you reading the book as well, because then it sort of takes you in a conversation with yourself, that what am I doing as a Pakistani, and how I could use some of these things, and also not only these things but other treasure which we have within our culture as a way of countering that extremism which we are facing. And the fact that these events are actually happening in Pakistan itself, I think this provides an evidence of this fact that Pakistani society has moved beyond that space of fear and threat which we had constantly. Because I still recall this time when the APS event had taken place, the next day and several other days followed by that event. There was this fear when I was going to work, like it could happen anywhere, It was so difficult to send my child to school because, I constantly had those pictures of, those images which were portrayed in the media. So it was something which had affected each of us psychologically, So that's something. Now, though we have moved beyond that particular, way of thinking about terrorism, maybe, but then of course, how do we take, departure from there? What do we think about, and how we resist that in our own ways, so that we don't go back to that point, and especially with the new, political changes happening in Pakistan, around Pakistan. So there's always this fear that it could always come back. So how we could, counter that, that acts of terrorism, and how prepared are we for doing that. And when I was reading the chapter on religion, I was deeply happy, and you also spoke about it in your talk earlier, to see how the people from different religious sects were actually attempting to counter terrorism, especially you mentioned how the Muslims are invited, by the Christians to celebrate like Easters and Christmas, right? I think it was beautiful, and the way the Muslims were accommodating them, and you just gave us examples from, Bahawalpur, I think, earlier on. So these, I think, are again, these are events, and these are, points which are telling us that we are moving ahead from those dominant discourses and dominant narratives of thinking about a religion only as a source of, you can say, conflict between different sects, between Shias, between Sunnis, between Hindus, between, Christians. So at local level, it means that we are moving ahead, and we are moving beyond that narrative, and we are trying to sort of counter that as well. And then you also address education system, like you mentioned earlier on. That was very interesting for me as a student of sociology as well. And you speak about the shortcomings and the gaps in the education system, and you argue that it's because of the state's strategic engagement with education, which is actually, leading to this intolerance among, the people, especially towards the religious minorities. And it's something, it's still there, I guess, despite the fact that we have a new curriculum, but there are debates that that thing has not really been tackled as such, and it's still there. But then, of course, really very, a source of happiness to see what, locally schools, institutions, Education Trust and Zoya schools are doing, to counter that narrative, and how they are producing a new generation of individuals with a new vision. Especially your interviews with the students, they were very powerful. What they were speaking about and what they were telling about, and not only it is producing new individuals who are more tolerant and more aware, but also who are more responsible about their roles and responsibilities towards their country and their state as well. So, and I guess this is what we really need in our education system. So we don't just need just one Baja Khan, in school, or one Zoya school. We need many, many of them for moving ahead with those, narratives which we have built over the years. So this actually speaks about the change in the attitude which is brought by vision provided by the schooling system itself. And so the stories of Zoya School and Baja Khan School were really very motivating for me, and they really also show the power of education, because as sociologists we also tend to see how we think education is bringing change. So this I think was very, very powerful. And one of the chapters focuses on NGOs, the role of NGOs, through their engagements in projects to revitalize cities, such as you spoke about Karachi, Rang De Karachi, and also, their efforts in reimagining the walls of Karachi, and similar examples you also cite from Lahore and from Bahawalpur. But one thing which was important for me was the fact that along with these messages, you also acknowledge the existence of threat. It's not like giving very ideal picture of the fact that Pakistan has changed and then we are all happy, but you constantly go back to that point that the threat is also there, especially speaking about and writing about the abduction of Reza Khan, and there are other examples around us which we know. So to conclude, I think this book provides a very rich ethnographic information, and it's very beneficial for the academia as well as common Pakistanis who are interested to act as agents of social change and social transformation. And it has wealth of information for researchers who are interested to explore violent extremism in Pakistan, like I said earlier. And each of the chapters and the themes could be used as a point of departure for further researches into these areas, by PhD students, by MS students. I think, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rabia. You have gone through the book very thoroughly. It was a very meticulous account of the book that she highlighted and shed light on each and every chapter. Now I would request Dr. Farhan Hanif, Director SPIR, to give his opinion and perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Hazir, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm honored to share space with all of you, and of course with the author of the book, Dr. Anita Weiss. I must thank you for writing this book. I think this was much needed, and to all students sitting here, I recommend that you read this book. I think there are some copies that the Oxford University Press has brought in. I highly recommend that you buy this book and you read this book.
Can I just add there?
Yeah.
And I want you to know that I brokered a deal with Oxford, no royalties, and they have slashed the price. It's like 1,100 rupees. So you can't get a book for cheaper than that. But I did that with Oxford. I said, I want Pakistanis reading this. So please do buy it and share it with your friends. Photocopy it with your friends.
Yeah.
But get the word out that there's things you all can do. Sorry, don't want to distract it.
Go
but I was
ahead.
just explaining it's not expensive.
That's brilliant. So buy the book. It's absolutely important to read, and the reason I think why I would recommend this book as an essential read is because when you look at the image or the representation of the idea of Pakistan that comes out in the popular press, that comes out on social media platforms, it's one based on violence, it's one based on misogyny, it's one based on discrimination against minorities, it is one based on intolerance towards religious and other ethnic minorities. And what this book suggests is another reality that is taking place at the grassroots, that is taking place at the level of the subaltern, that is taking place at the level of civil society. And these are representations that are against the violence and the intolerance and the hatred and the misogyny that you find in the popular press. And again, in the wider representation and idea of Pakistan that exists today. And it does so by invoking a number of key issue areas. So in arts, in music, in literature, in poetry, and even religious education, and a lot of good social work that people in Punjab, Sindh, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are doing in terms of education as well. So that is the remarkable, and there were facts that I didn't know about. So I didn't know about the science schools, for example, in southern Punjab. I did not even know about the Bacha Khan educational schools. And the key fact that the book takes out in terms of these two schools, which I found really interesting, is the social awareness that they teach to the children. So it's not about children going to school for their degrees or having goals of becoming an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or serve the country, but it's about the social awareness of what they need to do in terms of preaching and of course practicing a philosophy of non-violence. And the other thing that is important in terms of the book is when you read through the book, it also contests another general orientation about the Pakistani public or the populace, which is our apathy, which is that violence has become so routinized in our everyday lives that it happens, we look at it, and then we walk away from it, and then over a period of time we forget it. But this book challenges that notion of apathy of our people, that we are indifferent to the violence. No, there are people out there who are actually working and who are trying to, again, bring forth a reality which is, again, based on peaceful coexistence and, again, interfaith harmony. I think one of the key points, and because I work on issues of culture and identity, it's this very interesting debate which Dr. Weiss also mentioned in a speech earlier, and that is about reclaiming identity. And there's a very interesting debate on Karachi where you have an artist, Adila Suleiman, who says that we should focus on reimagining the walls of Karachi, not reclaiming the walls of Karachi. So it would be interesting to know from your perspective, and put it out as a question, that what is the difference in terms of reclaiming an identity or reimagining the identity, and what are the essential mores when you say you want to reclaim identity? So what is the identity in the first place? A Pakistani identity, if you will. And who is it that we want to reclaim it from? And who does the reclaiming? And again, how do these identity contestations at the level of the state and at the level of society, they, so to speak, maybe conflict and also compete with each other? So I think that was one of the more interesting points or the interesting areas of consideration. As a political scientist, and again I'll put another, there are many questions, but I'll put another two questions. And that is about how do you counter violent extremism? And of course your book provides a representation of how civil society actors are doing it in a number of issue areas. But I have two questions which are more immediate, which are more contemporary. And I would like to know your opinion about, let's say, the Pakistani state strategy of negotiating with disruptive actors, such as the TLP and the TTP. Do you think that makes sense in terms of countering violent extremism? Yesterday we had the information minister, for example, claiming that talks are underway with the TTP now, and that is something that we can do in order to contain violence within Pakistan. So how do you look at it for a start? And because you mentioned education, and it's such an important component of your book, and we have again recently this debate on the single national curriculum and the state's insistence on promoting a very uniform, homogeneous sense of Pakistani identity, which it believes is important to perpetuate in society. And of course, there are counter voices who are saying that if that, one of the drawbacks of all of it, that it again undercuts all the work of, again, interfaith harmony and the coexistence that is needed if we are, to take Pakistani state and Pakistani society forward. So in terms of these, countering violent extremism, how do you look at those two state strategies with respect to education, with respect to negotiation, and maybe again, how do you look at the reclaiming and the reimagining aspects of, let's say, the identity of the Pakistani state? Thank you.
Both commentators have raised some very brilliant issues. And you probably saw me, when you write something and you can't exactly find what you're looking for, that's what I've been doing. I was looking for the quote of Stuart Hall, which I think I now remembered where I put it. So I'll respond to about culture and reclaiming culture in a moment. But I first wanted to emphasize what our first commentator had said about music. I didn't go into the music so much because I feel like, I wish I could play it for you. But I think, look, I've met some really, really impressive people in the course of doing this research. A couple of whom are actually sitting in the audience right now. But I would say that one of the most impressive, I can't say the most, but he's really up there for me. Have any of you heard Sef Semejo? Sef Semejo and the Lauti Melo in Sindh? Oh my gosh! I mean, he is absolutely amazing. What he's trying to do, both in reclaiming culture. I mean, he takes his inspiration from Shah Abdul Latif Bhatti, but a little from Sachel Sarmast, he admits. But it's really that Bhatti writes about the land, and Sef's inspiration is the land. But he puts on the Lauti Melo celebration every year that draws tens of thousands of people to Jamshoro or else to Hyderabad. And as he said to me, for the year that I went, the quote I use, he says, during the day we talk about peace, and at night we sing about peace. And he has made it his special mission to really try to revitalize indigenous music from Sindh. Timur Rahman, who is an associate professor of political science at LUMS, but where his passion lies is in his Lal band. Yes, he's, the red band that speaks volumes about his politics. But he said, I went with him to a few poor schools where they performed. And he said, happiness is rationed out in Pakistan. We're just going to these schools to bring happiness. So here I went to these schools in areas that you wouldn't expect people. Hold on one second. Went to these schools in areas that you think are very conservative. And when the Lal band started singing, everybody in the audience, including the teachers, were dancing. And I could see what's wrong with bringing music and dancing to children's schools? I mean, we're all entitled to some happiness like that. And finally, the Rabab player, unbelievable, because what he has been doing is, he said, look, everybody all over Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, every village has a Rabab. But what he's trying to do is revive it as a symbol of Pakhtun identity. So Gulab Khail Afridi, he's giving Rabab lessons online and things like that. But what he's trying to do to really bring it across that the Rabab is meaningful for Pakhtuns. I found that very powerful. And again, he said, his great quote is, since when do you have to think of a Pakhtun and a Banduk? Let's think of a Pakhtun and his Rabab. Anyhow, so going to your two questions, and I'm sure I have a bit of a cold, as you can tell. I have forgotten them exactly. But the first was about reclaiming, recapturing culture. And I was trying to look at in the book I cite, I'm not going to find it, I'm not going to look, Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall talks about the idea of that we can understand culture in two ways. One is the culture that has been handed down to us over time. Frankly, I think that is what Imran Khan thinks about as culture. What people have been talking about, and they're saying this is culture, this is culture, this is culture. Stuart Hall instead critiques this and says, we have to understand what have been intermediaries in our understanding of culture and how other things have affected what's happening, colonialism, imperialism, and many other things as well. And so in our understanding of what is culture, we have to see it's dynamic, it's changing, and it's something different. I think that what you were saying about Anila Suleiman, who I think the world of, that critique really came out in the Karachi Biennale, which I don't write about in the book. Hey, you know, when you're writing a book, you can write about what you want to write about, right? I love the Lahore Biennale, what they were trying to accomplish. I like some things about the Karachi Biennale, but there was one point where Anila Suleiman tried to put up a display to commemorate the number, the thousands of people who had been victims of terrorism in Karachi. And the organizer, I never did have a chance to talk to them, so I can't say why. But the organizers of the Karachi Biennale refused to let the exhibition exist. Instead, they preferred to get artists from around the world to come to the Karachi Biennale. Great, but that doesn't work for a sociologist. I'm like, really? And I think what Anila Suleiman was trying to do is something, and I write about her a lot in my book, it's something that I was trying to just get people to think about. One thing, my book is not prescriptive. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just trying to get you inspired to think about what is happening around Pakistan that you don't know about, and where do you fit in all that discourse? So, did I answer your questions? Back to you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. West. It was a good answer to what Dr. Hanif put a question to you. The point that, like all the panelists highlighted, that this is very enticing text. As a sociologist, anthropologist, we need to, like, when we are going through the book, and you are good and having fertile concept like hegemony, ideology, you can have all sort of other sociological and anthropological text, or hermeneutics, how do you interpret a particular text. And if you have this like culture hegemony and how the hegemonic discourses of violent extremism are available in the literature, and if you are going to have a counter argument going through the book, and then you see that, like in the very beginning, Dr. Weiss has very clearly mentioned that I was pushed to look into the causes and factors, but this is something that you cannot do in all the time. And as I mentioned earlier, that it need a complete career life, 40-50 years, and still you will not be able to figure out what are the exact causes or factors that motivate or drive violent extremist acts. Like the pull and push factors that we see, like the poverty, illiteracy, undemocratic society, are sometimes challenged, particularly when you look into the accident like Christchurch or the Fazal family in Canada, or something happening in other places where people that can be called as like accidental guerrilla acts, or the motorway act in Pakistan. Or so you cannot like put into table the factors that what are responsible for and how these can be addressed. So there are multiple way local vices that can counter a particular type of extremist act. With this, I would open the forum for questions. Okay.
Can I read something first?
Yeah.
I do want to open it up for questions, but as he was saying that, I was reminded that I didn't go into this. I thought it would be very useful to tell you what I actually wrote, because while I was conducting research on this book, there were a few people who said to me, how can you write about what Pakistanis are doing without going into the background of where the extremism came from. And I would say to them, that's not what I'm doing. You write about that. I mean, Salim Shahzad tried to write about it, and he was killed for trying to do that. But we can spend a lifetime trying to do that. But there's so many interconnections and webs, and we'll never find it out. But I do address it when I talked about David Culcullen's Accidental Guerrillas later. And I talk about the total. The focus of this book, however, is not about why some people have become extremists and engaged in violence. It's not what this book is about. It's not addressing the foundations of this extremism, how it began, what forces encouraged it, nor the roles distinct groups have played in encouraging, promoting, or joining the violence. There are many conspiracy theories in Pakistan about this, and while one could spend a lifetime to get to the bottom of it, even then much of what is unknown would remain unknown. Many people in Pakistan have tried to push me to explore this further, but I refuse. To do so valorizes these acts. Instead, what we will explore in the remainder of the book are the laudatory efforts of Pakistanis who want their culture back, their lives back, and wish to live collectively in a future without violence. These are not weapons of the weak, to use James Scott's terminology, of everyday forms of resistance that the disempowered have always used in a culture to resist oppression, but are rather new, innovative acts used either to recapture local identity or to contribute to creating a new syncretic one. So,
Right.
And with that, let's turn to the question.
Okay, thank you, Uwais, for explaining that. I just recall one of the part that was taught here, highlighted by Dr. Rabia and also taught by Anita Uwais. Education, like I'm a sociologist of education, I'm closely looking into the curriculum for the last almost 20 years. The textbook politics, ideology politics, textbooks around the world are ideologically embedded. There's no country in the world which can claim that our textbooks are objective or free, or it's not subjective or not ideologically embedded. So there is politics on the textbook pages. I would like partially agree with that and partially disagree. Being a sociologist, we are here to give our perspective. Like there is a statement in the book that say like public school, which could not successful in the last 73 years to come up with the behavior or socialization of children which these private schools are doing. I have a different perspective on that. I partially agree with the argument that like public schooling in Pakistan as a failure, but there are so many good aspects of that as well. And on the other side, like when we looking into the private school variety and the issues that are coming out of that, the intolerance. So there is a strong debate that more diversity in school system has actually led to a great disturbance in society, because there is these others. They think the public school graduate are thinking of the private school graduate as other of them. So a sort of apartheid has been created in the country, and then we have the madrasa system, and then we have all other medium and variety. So there's a huge like exclusion that we have. All groups are pushing each others that they're not similar to us. Yes, some of the private school may be doing well, some of the government school may be doing well, but like having a statement about all the public school would be a bit problematic sociologically. Would be calling sweeping generalization about the public school. This being a sociologist of education, I think there was like in my notice that this is something which I think is a bit sweeping there. Am I right?
A little bit,
A little bit.
but not a lot.
And about the
I mean, it
religion,
was
it
really
was
in another
quite
country.
quite enticing for me, the religion chapter, because accepting and respecting diversity as the way forward. And this is how the religious leaders are doing right now for the last 10 years or the last one decade. They're trying to
preach this element that respect and accept diversity. Now over to you people. Thank you.
Actually, could you also, as you speak, I'd like to take 4 or 5 questions, comments, and also identify yourself, just so I have a clue who you are.
Okay, my name is Sabna Malik. For those of you who are not from DSS department, I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to contribute to Anita's process. Anita's latest book and my PhD thesis have a connection. We are old friends. My first interaction with Dr. Anita Weiss was when she came to the DSS department, but we couldn't meet technically. I was traveling, and then I was in a conference, an American Studies Association conference, which was an all-white conference with not a single South Asian in sight. And when I finished my session, I heard someone say, "In लोगों को आपकी बात समझ नहीं आई." And I looked around and there was not a single Desi in that audience, and I was like, who has said that? Or are my ears ringing? And there was a lady, and she says, "Hello, मैं अनीता वाइस हूँ. मैं कह रही थी इन लोगों को आपकी बात समझ नहीं आई." And that's where our friendship started, and I think that's like 10 plus years old.
Oh, yeah.
But more than that.
More than that.
Much more.
She had no gray hair.
I don't, genuinely no gray hair at that time. And then when I was doing my PhD, I didn't know who one of my external evaluators were, till such time that I received a phone call from Anita, who was traveling all over Pakistan with Hasnain, her Man Friday, and her white car, her golden car or something of that sort that she had at that time. Which she had actually bought for this purpose. And all these names that Anita has taken, we would be talking about it. I would just be sitting like a quiet audience, and she would be telling me whom all she is meeting whenever we would be together in Islamabad. And she calls me and she says, I'm doing a lot of gym while traveling to Sindh. And I was like, okay, how are you gymming while you're traveling to Sindh? She says, because I'm reading your thesis and it's a very fat piece of writing. So thank you, Anita, for this awesome contribution. You have actually given a lot of us food for thought, and you've also given us a different perspective to look at things. If you can't really understand the dynamics, you can't understand the roots, try to understand the dynamics and make the best out of it. So all hail to you for your effort, and very best wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One short, small comment or question. You can have your commentary.
Awais Khan from School of Law. Basically, belong from Bhadan, KP. Madam Anita, my comment is that our country is a market of extremism. Different varieties are available. Shia extremism, Railway, Deobandi. And the second thing, that individuals are doing things what you wrote in your book, that in their individual efforts, but in some way we can smell that the state is not serious and involved in feeding extremism. Recently what happened in Lahore TLP, and since 2017, first we feed them, then ban them, and then again removing the ban and bring them in the so-called Komidara. And the second thing is what happened after the APS attack, National Action Plan, and the state is not again going to be serious in implementing them. And the question Sir Farhan also was that negotiation with KTP can play a role in decreasing violent extremism and the single national curriculum. And one thing, I will say that in our Pashtun culture, that one of our political leaders announced that he is going to open a musical school in his party office. But some people make fun of him and call him enemy of Pashtun and Islam. Also label them that he is destroying Pashtun culture. So what will be your thoughts and thank you.
Okay, I do want to respond.
From here.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. I do want to respond to that because I actually, remember I did ask, did I cover everything? He said yes, and then I didn't. First of all, I hope you've heard Hasina Gul recite her poetry in Mardan, because she really is amazing. What you've asked a lot of questions, and I'd love to talk with you at some time. But I think the important question that I didn't address before was the question of, well, TLP. Well, we can't even talk about that because we know nothing. We're not informed about what the government has done. Look, we can't even talk about these things. I can't say who's behind the TLP. I can't even question that, can I? Or I can, but I shouldn't. But about the TTP, I think it's important. On the one hand, Pakistan needs to move on. But you don't move on by giving amnesty to a horrible group of thugs. For a previous research project, I had lived in Swat for a while, and I interviewed women. And I interviewed this one woman whose husband was one of the men who was hung in the public square in Matta, only for opposing the Taliban. He did nothing else. Nobody has a right to, in my opinion, to forgive those people. This is moving a little away from my book, but what the state can do is either create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like they did in South Africa. 1 minute. You can have individuals come to this, and individuals can say how they, whatever happened, that they would like to move on also. You cannot give amnesty to an entire horrific organization like the TLP. I don't know where that came from. And I can't see whose best interest that would be in. But even so, this is not about whose best interest. So I guess all I'm trying to say is I was responding to what he said about amnesty to the TLP. I write so many things that people have been doing to counter the impact of the TLP. Go read some of the poetry of Abbasim Yousafzai. It is just amazing. And when I was in Peshawar recently, he had me give a talk to the Pashto Academy where I read some of his poetry. I read it in English, he read it in Pashto. They loved it because nobody ever valorizes what they're saying about these things, right? And I think that we're about to go into a real social media news, conversations about should amnesty be given to the TLP. That's not even a question in my eyes. But what I think is important is what are local people saying and doing to try to take a stand against this. When I was interviewing students at the Bachakhan schools, the older students, I asked them, what would you do? What would you say if your cousin, your brother, your best friend were to come to you and say, Bus, I've had it. I can't take this anymore. I'm going to go off and join the Taliban. What would you do? And I was so impressed by how many of them said, not the usual, think of your mother, think of your family, but instead, how will we grow and create a better Pakistan if you do something like that? And that impressed me. So I know you asked a lot of questions. I hope some of this answered some of them.
Thank you for being here. My name is Maz. I'm from English department and I'm from Medan. Peace is a thing that has been deferred and postponed and put off for many years in Pakistan, and we haven't realized that peace. So your book, I think it's a glimmer of hope in such a disparate society. Thank you for writing this book. My question is this. Do you think that we can counter terrorism or extremism or anything of the extremist ideologies? How do you do it with poetry? How do you do it with art? How do you do it? I mean, if someone is pointing guns at you and you're dancing there and there, how can we dance in front of guns? I mean, don't we have to do something more concrete than just raising our voices? When we are silenced, when we are, our schools are bombed, our culture, we are not allowed to sing, we are not allowed to dance. I mean, here in Pakistan, I mean, right now, if we go outside and we dance, not in Qaeda University, but somewhere else, right? We say like dancing is prohibited, but it's haram.
मैं ये कहने वाला था कि on campus तो बिल्कुल ही ये
Right. Thank you.
This is a very important question you're asking. And when you think about it, I'm using art. Is that you or me? You're my. Yes, I'm looking at art and poetry and music and performance as realities. But I'm also looking at them metaphorically. Because I don't believe you're going to stop violence and extremism by using violence. You're not going to be able to kill off every terrorist, because every time you kill somebody, you get 10 more people enlisted to avenge that person's death. But what you do have to do is get people to realize, wait a minute, that's not us. I mean, this is not prescriptive. This is based on what I heard from people. They're saying, you say, that's not us. This is what we value. This is what we want. And that, over time, this is why I decided to look at these education institutions. Because over time, you gradually get a change in the mindset that will not tolerate extremism, but also will not become a violent extremist. That's the thing. To say, I'm sorry, but at least I came today, right? But I do have a bad cold. I do, in the first chapter, I do go into what the military did and all of their Arabic named campaigns. But you know what? You don't kill an ideology just by killing people. You have to have local people begin to believe in what they believe in. You know, like their culture, their ideology. And that's why I want people to read the book, to realize you're not alone in this, that all over Pakistan, there are these sparks of hope all over the place. And they're saying, gosh darn it, or in Pashto and Punjabi, stronger than that, but they're saying, that's not us. We're not giving into that. And I think that that's the important thing that I think that was informed by what I heard people telling me. Did that come across clearly at all?
The point is that we have to
Here,
develop alternative discourses or counter discourses
Here.
that can reverse the ideology which is prevailing or which was prevailing or which was wrongly inculcated to some segment of society. So there can be not one particular discourse, dance and music, that can be multiple discourses, alternative narratives that can reverse which was going on, or the things that were prevailing in our society, or that was inculcated from outside or neighboring countries or some other places, we don't know that, right? So that's how the book can contribute to develop a sort of alternative narrative and insider perspective.
And asserting it.
Yeah.
Assalamualaikum, ma'am.
Welcome.
And my name is Sham.
Closer. Put your mic closer to your...
On karo.
Ma'am, I have a question and I also want to give my opinion, if I'm allowed.
Yeah.
My question is like, let's suppose I am from Chitral and my mother tongue is Khwar.
She's in
Yes, I know Ma'am Rabia. Yes. So my mother tongue is Khwar. After that, when I come to, let's suppose, down district, then I come to know that my national language is Urdu. After that, my religious language is Arabic. Then my office language is English. I have to came across 4 languages. So whatever I think, first of all, I have to think that thing in Khwar. So then after that, I have to translate the same thing in Urdu. After that, I have to look that either there is any religious bias or not. So for that, I have to do my religion as well. After that, I have to present it in English in my academic area, wherever I go. So, ma'am, if I go for my language, then I have to skip the modern language, the modern knowledge, the modern education. So what would you suggest to us, that either we go for our culture or we have to take the modern education system?
You answer that.
Oh,
It's a difficult.
I said because I'm not writing about
okay.
that, and I'm not writing. I'm not writing anything prescriptive.
Whether we like it or we don't like it, the English language, but as per the colonial influence, we are going to speak in it. Learning languages is not something bad. I think we should learn, and we have the ability and capability to learn as many languages as possible, and that's how you get more rich knowledge. As per communication is concerned, I think we have official language, Urdu, and we have a notification from the government of Pakistan to even communicate in Urdu. That's something different, that we are not following that, right? So around the world, like there are people, there are nations, you look into Germany, Spain, France, even all these countries, they are very strict to their language. Language is the basic element in your identity, or this is how we construct our identity. So this is a national level decision. If he suggests something like, okay, reverse the entire process, then like Chinese, we have to develop our own technology and softwares, and then the capacity, like language is connected with economy, culture and economy. So if we have that potential to come up with like a strong economy where people are going to learn our language, and then we would be able in that. Otherwise, we have to follow.
Can I?
Yeah.
Can I?
Also, I will add when you're done.
You go ahead. And
Well, I just want to say, I knew I'd be inspired for an answer if he answered. I do actually address this in the book, kind of, sort of, because when I write about the Bachachan Education Foundation schools and the Zoya Science schools, they both use English medium. They both are English medium schools. Why? Because the knowledge of the world is either it's in English or a few other languages. But if you this is what has saddened me over the last 30 years. Remember, I've been coming to Pakistan 43 years. When I first came, people could speak in English with me easily. I still learned Urdu, but they knew English. Poor children who went to village schools knew English. But thanks to Zia Haq, the chief marshal, not from International Science, he's got to change his name. But thanks to Zia Haq and the transformation into Urdu medium, I have felt so bad that so many Pakistanis really don't understand English. They can't express themselves in English. Who are these? They're often from working class and poor backgrounds. You know, that never could imagine coming to Quaid-e-Azam University, for example. So that has really hurt the possibility of mobility for the poorer classes. So this is why I think those two schools making that decision. Now the other thing is religion. I don't want to talk about any other countries in the world, but the Western countries and Pakistan. That's all I know about. We do not, if somebody comes to my university and they wish to study Arabic, they wish to study Hebrew, they wish to study any of the other religious languages, they can as a course. But until you get to university, in the public education system, other languages from religions are not included. You want to study religion, you do it like at home, in your own time, go to religious school, like, you know, after school hours or something. That would eliminate one language from your possibilities of languages in which that you have to speak in. But I mean, seriously, this is the problem I have, and I don't want to get into talking about it because I physically can't talk about it. But the single national curriculum, I mean, there's no reason for Arabic to be included in that, in my opinion, whatsoever, and you'll all disagree with me, but that is my opinion.
The reason is in front of you, ma'am. If we are unable to even read Arabic, So that's why we are just following what our Maulvi said. So says what.
So do read some of do read some of Hafiz Nizamani's poetry in the Sindhi poetry section.
Can I make a quick comment?
Please.
Yeah, please.
You see, you make, I think the question that you pose is related to the notion of identity. The way that you pose Khawar, Urdu, English. It seems
Dr. Sadia, she here?
I texted her
I think
to come
you're
here.
framing it as a point of one
Maybe
coming
she
at the
joins
expense
on
of
Teams.
another,
Maybe she joins on.
right? But when you open yourself up in terms of your identity, you'll see that your identities are quite fluid. You're a Chitrali, you're a Pakistani, you're a Shia, Sunni, man, woman, non-transgender identities, are also being accepted, right? You're a student, you are a brother, right? You are a son. And when you open up that facets of identity to multiple different levels, right? What you find at the end of the day is that it's very heterogeneous. And what our mind does at the cognitive level is to think in terms of binaries. Urdu and not English or not Arabic or not, our local language. When all of them can be, co-opted within the identity of one singular person. And that is where the identity of Pakistan should flow from accepting this plurality,
we have to close.
from accepting this diversity, right? And if you can learn multiple languages, good for you. It only
If a girl
enhances
has a
your
question,
cognitive abilities,
okay.
right? So
call me on the
I don't
girl.
think
We
languages or
haven't
even
heard from any
identity
girls
of any form
besides
within myself
Salma.
or within you has to come one at the expense of another, which all these actors are trying to do, TLP and all, right? Trying to tell us, no, that this is the form of identity which matters most and the others don't. And that is where they're absolutely wrong.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anita. It was wonderful talk, and I already know about your work. I have read this book as well, and I got too much information. And frankly speaking, I don't know about the Bacha Foundation and other information which was mentioned in the book. I would just want to say, as students were asking question about the different languages and how we promote, and this is good way to counter violent extremism. I just want to say, if they want to read it, and you should go back to your notes and lectures, and you should go in the hegemony and the knowledge production, as Dr. Hazar also mentioned, that culture, ideology, and how knowledge is hegemonized, and we have different discourses. I thought if Dr. Nita can come again, we can have another talk. Okay, what is knowledge production hegemony, and how this relation between global south and global north works on it, and if we are unable to transfer, we are unable to translate our knowledge locally, so then what we are going to do. And academia, as I would accept that, is an academic mafia, and when we are going toward internationalization of education and everything, and we should thankful to her, because this is available at our local bookseller shop, and it's very, जो book की price है वो ज़्यादा high नहीं है, cost is very low. Otherwise, what we are going to publish at internationally, it's not being accessible in Pakistan. We have to download. If university is paying, then we can download all these material. Otherwise, if we are going to work at JRS, now you publish internationally, but you have to pay back for downloading them. So I think it's good piece of knowledge
I didn't
at
hear what
local
you said.
level. It's good solution. It's being a sociologist and social science student and teacher, it's our role to trace the roots and what is being available at local level, and for different voices we can say that. And if definitely hegemony does work. Even Dr. Anita can't say, for example, if a student are trying to publish something, then that would be something different. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My apology to all those who have a lot of questions. I welcome Dr. Mazhar Bhatti from Islamic University. He is head of the psychology department there. Dr. Ikhlaq, who is a sociologist in International Islamic University, and he also focuses on social movements in Pakistan with all these like TLP and what the other political set in Pakistan exists. He has worked extensively on student activism and politics on campuses. So I would like if he wants to comment or give his opinion, and then we will close.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hazar. I'm Akhlaq from International Islamic University. I'm not going to
discuss in details the social movements and what Dr. Hazar has. But I love to hear from Dr. Anika, from Dr. Rabia, from Dr. Hanif. And I always believe whenever there is involvement of the state, sometimes it makes the picture very big. And most of us, like the common people, they take all these pictures as the undeniable truths. That makes something very bad. But at the same time, what we need to learn is how we are able to read and how we are able to go with the local narratives, what Dr. Anita has pointed out very loudly and clearly. और इनकी अहमियत कभी भी कम नहीं होती. जैसे बहुत सारे स्टूडेंट्स हमारे शायद थोड़े ज़्यादा अभी एज भी ऐसी है, थोड़े एम्बिशियस भी है, तो जो लोकल लोगों की आवाज़ होती है, चाहे वो इन फॉर्म ऑफ अ पोएम है, इन फॉर्म ऑफ अ सॉन्ग है, इन फॉर्म ऑफ अ पोएट्री है, इन फॉर्म ऑफ अ डांस है, इन फॉर्म ऑफ अ प्रोवर्ब है, तो वो कोई भी it gives you a window actually. Where can you see the ray of hope? By ending it, thank you very much, Dr. Anita, for introducing us little windows from Sindh, from KP, from poetry, from wall artwork, and from singing. And we need to recognize, we need to appreciate them. This may deepen down the cracks that we are calling them as alternate voices. Thank you very much.
And I would love for you to write a review of the book. You have to. You got it. You caught it.
At the end, I would request Dr. Salma to, should I say thank you or you want to say thank you?
Please go ahead. You're the host.
Okay, this is, I have no words to say thank you to Professor Anita because she was not feeling well despite of the poor health condition. She came all the way to Quaid-e-Azam University to talk to us, talk to our students, and that is an honor for us. As she mentioned that I have refused royalty from the Oxford firm or company just because that the book should be cheaper and it should be read by all citizens of Pakistan.
I declined the royalty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is
So what
how,
is the original
and
price?
they are around here.
What is the original price?
So that's really like an honor for us to have her here with us this noon and this morning. I'm thankful to Dr. Rabia who accepted my request to be part of the panel. Dr. Hanif, of course, we thank you him because he was having engagement with the PhD students and having a seminar, but he spared time and came here. Dr. Shabana, we congratulate her, she got promotion and she is there to join in all these things, but she was in the panel. We thank you her for facilitation of the hall and the rest of facilities that she provided us. Of course, Dr. Salma, she is the event manager of Quaid-e-Azam University. There would be not a single event that she would not be able to manage it. Dr. Ikram, of course, anthropologist in the Department of Sociology, he came and joined us. We would love to hear him, but I think we are short of time. And of course the students. If you were not there, we would not have done this seminar. And the Oryx talk, Dr. Naima, and my students, Dr. Raza, Dr. Shahid, and all these people who really helped me out in organizing this. And thankful to Dr. Mazhar Bhatti for all the way coming from Islamic University to join us. I was interested that I should have a psychology perspective as well because he's a psychologist. But
Dr. Musarrat and Dr. Sher Mohammed from Sargodha as well.
Dr. Sher Mohammed and Dr. Musarrat from Sargodha University, they are friend of Anita and they came all the way from the university to join us. So thank you, ma'am, and thank you for coming too. And we would have such kind of events in future as well. And if she's around, that would be my request that whenever she's in Pakistan, this is all right. to have you here. If you
I
allow
love
us,
it, I love it.
we establish it as our right to have her here.
Well,
on
especially now
Thursdays.
that you have a sociology department.
Yeah, this is
Before, I never knew where I belonged, anthropology, DSS, but there's a sociology department. I love it, I'm
Well,
here.
she emailed me like 2 months back or 3 months back that I'm
In the
coming to
past.
Pakistan in November or October, and say, Monica, yes, we will be available and we will have you here in Quaid-e-Azam University, because when we met previously, I was in Islamic University, that was 2019, and then I wrote an email that I have joined Quaid-e-Azam University, so I would see you there instead of Islamic University. So thank you everyone, and we end with this. Have a good evening, good afternoon. Thank you.